The cache were synonymous with fear, towering creatures cloaked in slate-grey hides, their serpent-like eyes gleaming with an unsettling intelligence. Masters of the dread, they had conquered worlds before a single shot was fired. This ancient psychic ability allowed them to project terror into the minds of their enemies, a fear so deep that entire civilizations would retreat or submit at the mere thought of confrontation. For centuries, the cache had believed themselves invincible, the apex predators of the galaxy. No species had ever truly resisted them, that is, until they encountered humans. Above the human colony of New Canaan, a frontier planet on the edge of Confederation space, the cache flagship, the V-Dark, drifted ominously. Below, the colony appeared small and insignificant, a scattered collection of dusty buildings amidst a desolate, reddish landscape. Yet this world was unlike the others the cache had easily subdued. Commander Zorik stood in the ship's command center, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the live feed of the colony. His voice, a low growl, echoed through the room. They will fall like the rest. His confidence remained unshaken. He had seen countless species crumble before the might of the cache. Humans are but animals, he continued, his tone dismissive, barely scratching at the edge of space. They are weak. Beside him stood General Vought, a seasoned cache war leader whose silence spoke volumes. He had witnessed the dread's power firsthand and had never seen it fail. Activate the mental projection, Zorik ordered, his voice brimming with expectation. The dread would soon cascade over the colony below, and chaos would reign. As Vought complied, the psychic assault began. The effect was immediate and devastating. Men dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as screams filled the air. The dread poured into their minds, fear coursing through them like venom, igniting their primal instincts. They sought any means of escape from the overwhelming terror, scrambling away from the windows and doors as if the very air was poison. Panic erupted, spreading like wildfire, as the cache reveled in the chaos unfolding beneath them. In one of the colony bunkers, Ethan Cross gripped the cold steel of his rifle, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had heard the stories, the rumors of aliens who could break a man's mind without ever touching him, but hearing about it was one thing, experiencing it was entirely another. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to run, to hide, to do anything but stand and fight. The fear pressed down on him like a heavy weight on his chest, and images of death, failure, and despair flooded his mind, each more vivid and horrifying than the last. Yet, beneath that all-consuming fear, something else stirred deep in his gut, anger. The thought of giving in, of allowing some faceless enemy to crush him without a fight, ignited a surge of defiance within him. With a fierce determination, Ethan slammed the stock of his rifle into the ground, forcing himself to stand taller. Around him, other soldiers and civilians were struggling against the same psychic onslaught. Most had succumbed to their fear, collapsing to their knees, some weeping, others muttering prayers, while only a few remained upright, their faces twisted in grim determination. Ethan's gaze swept across the bunker until it landed on Thomas Grady, an older soldier with lines etched deeply into his weathered face. Grady's hand shook, yet he held tightly to his weapon, refusing to let go. Fighting against the invisible pressure that bore down on him, Ethan staggered over to the older man, gritting his teeth. "Grady!" he shouted, the effort to be heard drowning in the cacophony of screams and chaos. "We don't give in." Grady's bloodshot eyes met his, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a silent understanding. The fear was palpable, but so was their collective fight. "Damn right we don't," Grady growled, his voice low but steady. "They want us broken. They don't know us." Back aboard the V-Dark, Commander Zorik watched with a growing sense of satisfaction, his eyes scanning the chaos below, expecting to see the humans' complete capitulation. This had happened countless times before. Civilizations had crumbled before the dread, surrendering without a fight. But as he observed, something was amiss. Despite the initial collapse, a disturbing trend emerged. A growing number of humans remained on their feet, still fighting. They resist, Zorik thought, his disbelief palpable. Vaught's voice trembled slightly as he muttered, "This is impossible." Yet the proof lay before them. Small pockets of humans were rallying, pushing against the overwhelming fear, finding ways to control it and even turning it into something else, something dangerous. Zorik could feel it, too, the dread shifting, the emotions of the humans evolving. What should have been a crushing victory had transformed into a surprising resistance. The cache were not prepared for this. As the chaos continued below, Zorik's frustration mounted. How could these creatures withstand the dread? They were supposed to be weak, easily manipulated and broken. But now, he watched as they forged a connection through their shared defiance, a bond that seemed to strengthen with each passing moment. It was an unforeseen twist, and it made Zorik uneasy. His confidence wavered as he realized they had underestimated humanity. In the bunker, Ethan felt the tide beginning to turn. The shared determination among the remaining soldiers ignited a fire within him. They began to rally, their fear transforming into a collective strength, a force that no longer trembled in the face of dread. They stood not just as individuals but as a united front, pushing back against the chaos. As the human resolve solidified, Zorik's mind raced with the implications. The cache had always operated under the belief that fear was an unbeatable weapon. Yet here, in this moment, they were witnessing a profound truth. Humans had something deeper, something that fear could not extinguish. Their strength lay not in sheer numbers or advanced technology, but in their unyielding spirit, their capacity to fight for one another, even in the darkest of times. The battle had begun, but it was no longer about merely surviving. It was a struggle for identity, dignity, and the very essence of what it meant to be human. And in that struggle, the cache would find that the humans were not just animals. They were warriors, willing to fight against the odds, and perhaps, just perhaps, they would not fall like the rest. Overwhelming panic was rapidly transforming into anger, defiance, and, worst of all, resolve. "They're fighting back," Zorik hissed, his composure fraying at the edges as he watched the scene below unfold. The intensity of the dread had been meant to crush any remaining resistance, but instead, it seemed to fuel the humans. Beside him, General Vort's eyes narrowed in concentration. "Strengthen the assault," Zorik commanded, his voice rising with urgency. Vort complied, pouring more of his psychic energy into the projection, amplifying the dread into a wave of terror designed to crush the human resolve. The pressure doubled, an oppressive force meant to suffocate the last flickers of hope among the humans. Yet, to Zorik's shock, the stronger the cache pushed, the harder some humans fought back. In one of the colony bunkers, Ethan Cross felt the renewed assault hit him like a sledgehammer, nearly buckling his legs beneath him. He fought against the urge to succumb, forcing himself to stay upright. Beside him, Grady let out a low curse, but his hands remained steady on his weapon. Ethan could feel the fear clawing at his mind, whispering insidiously that escape was the only option. He had felt fear before, but this was something new, a fear that seemed to reach into the very depths of his being. Ethan glanced around, his senses heightened. It was as if he could almost see the outlines of the enemy's tactics, the way they were trying to crush him from the inside out. But humanity had a long and storied history with fear. Men had survived wars, famines, and plagues, things that should have shattered them, but didn't. This wasn't just a fight of weapons, it was a battle of endurance. He remembered the stories of resilience that had shaped human history and knew that this was their time to draw upon that legacy. He reached out and grabbed Grady by the shoulder, pulling him to his feet. "They think this fear can break us," Ethan said, his voice shaking but fierce. "But they don't know what it's like to be human." Grady, grinning through clenched teeth, nodded in agreement. "They're about to find out." Ethan took in the bunker around him. The fear was still there, gnawing at them like a ravenous beast, but the men who remained were pushing through it, slowly rising to their feet, weapons in hand. No longer paralyzed by terror, they were beginning to fight back. Outside, in the colony streets, more humans followed suit. Soldiers and civilians alike began to form small, organized pockets of resistance. They moved cautiously but with newfound determination, using the buildings and terrain to their advantage. The atmosphere was shifting. No longer driven by mindless panic, the humans fought with a new kind of intensity. They were not just fighting to survive, they were fighting to assert their humanity, to prove that they could not be broken. They rallied together, finding strength in numbers, united by the shared conviction that they would not let fear dictate their actions. Meanwhile, aboard the V-Dark, Zorik's calm exterior began to crack. He slammed his fist into the armrest of his command chair, frustration boiling over. "This is not possible. No species can resist the dread." His voice was laced with disbelief. Vort, too, appeared rattled. "It's as if they're adapting," he said, his voice trembling. "The fear isn't paralyzing them. It's pushing them to fight harder." Zorik turned sharply to face Vort, fury etched on his face. "This ends now. We launch a full-scale invasion. Overwhelm them with numbers." His resolve was unwavering, but Vort hesitated for the first time. A flicker of doubt crept into his mind as he considered the implications of the humans' resistance. These humans were different. They were not the fragile prey the cache were accustomed to. He could feel it in the shifting tides of emotion on the battlefield below. The humans were not running or surrendering. They were rallying, their fear transforming into something that sent a chill down his spine. Back on the ground, Ethan Cross led his group of survivors out of the bunker, moving through the shattered streets of the colony. The atmosphere was still thick with the remnants of chaos, but something fundamental had shifted. The fear was still present, hanging in the air like a dark cloud, but it was no longer the master of their actions. It had become manageable, a force they could harness rather than a shackle binding them. As Ethan scanned the battlefield, he realized something profound. Fear was no longer the enemy, it had become fuel. The cache had made a grave mistake. They believed fear was a tool to control and conquer, but humans understood it was more than that. Fear could sharpen a man's senses, push him to survive, and help him overcome impossible odds. "We're not prey," Ethan muttered, looking up at the massive cache ships looming in the sky. "We're predators now." The realization ignited something fierce within him. The cache had come to break humanity with fear. Instead, they had inadvertently taught humans how to wield it. Ethan crouched behind a burnt-out transport vehicle, his breath steady as he focused on the scene unfolding around him. Soldiers were regrouping, and the civilians were finding their strength. He could see the flickers of hope igniting in their eyes, a determination that pushed them beyond the brink of despair. They were no longer merely reacting to the dread, they were actively pushing against it, refusing to be subjugated by their own fear. This battle was no longer about survival, it was about fighting back against the forces that sought to dominate them. With each small victory, the humans were learning to harness their fear, channeling it into resilience. They would show the cache that humanity was not just an insignificant speck in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they would rise to meet the challenge head-on. Ethan felt the pulse of defiance radiating through his group, a heartbeat of solidarity that resonated within him. They were ready to reclaim their narrative, to rewrite the story that had long been dictated by fear. With every ounce of strength, he prepared to stand alongside his fellow humans, united in their fight. This was their moment to shine, and they would not let it slip away. They were not just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for each other, and that bond would prove stronger than any psychic dread the cache could muster. Ethan Cross peered through the scope of his rifle, scanning the desolate streets of New Canaan. The colony had transformed into a wasteland of rubble and smoke, remnants of the fierce battle that had raged on for hours. Yet, despite the destruction surrounding him, he felt a simmering resolve within. The fight was far from over. Ahead, the imposing figures of the cache troops moved in a rigid formation, advancing with the precision of a predatory machine. Their weapons glowed ominously with lethal energy, casting long shadows that danced across the battlefield. But it wasn't the sight of the cache that worried Ethan now. Instead, it was the unsettling silence in his mind. For the past few hours, the crushing psychic weight of the dread had vanished, like fog suddenly lifting. The fear that had once gripped him was gone, or rather, the projection of fear had dissipated. This absence left him feeling uneasy, as though he was standing at the precipice of something unknown. "Cross, you hearing me?" came the gruff voice of Thomas Grady over the comms. Ethan pressed his earpiece tighter. Loud and clear. "You in position?" "We're set, but I don't like this. It's too quiet." Grady's voice was edged with concern, and Ethan could sense the same apprehension radiating from the other members of their small team. There was a pause before Grady added, "They're planning something." Ethan knew Grady was right. The cache were not known for backing down. If they had ceased using the dread, it meant they were shifting tactics. This realization, while troubling, also presented an opportunity, one Ethan planned to exploit. "Hold tight," Ethan replied. "We hit them hard when they get in range." Behind him, a small group of survivors, those who had managed to endure the initial cache assault, waited with tense anticipation. They had come a long way since the invasion began, learning to fight amidst the ashes of their home. Most of them had been civilians when the attack started, but now they stood together as soldiers, hardened and focused. Their fear, which had once felt overwhelming, had morphed into a tool, a sharp edge they wielded to stay alert and alive. Ethan glanced at one of the younger soldiers named Raw, who had proven himself in the last few skirmishes. Raw was visibly nervous but determined, gripping his rifle tightly. "You ready, Raw?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the tension. Raw nodded, though the anxiety flickered in his eyes. "Ready, sir. Just wish we knew what they were up to." "Stay sharp," Ethan advised. "We'll find out soon enough." Miles away, deep within the heart of cache territory, General Vought paced inside the dimly lit command chamber of the V-Dark. His mind churned with thoughts of their recent failures. No species had ever resisted the dread as these humans had. The sheer defiance they displayed was an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his psyche, uncertainty. Vought had been part of the cache fleet for decades, leading psychic assaults that crippled entire planets. But this was different. These humans didn't just break, they seemed to thrive off their fear, twisting it into an odd kind of resolve that fueled their resistance. Vort's sharp claws tapped the surface of the command table as he studied the holographic map of New Canaan's surface. "We must adapt," he said, breaking the oppressive silence in the room. His voice was low but firm, echoing against the walls as he glanced toward Zorik, who stood motionless nearby, his eyes dark and unreadable. "We are the cache," Zorik replied, his tone dismissive. "They should be the ones adapting to us. Yet they are not." Vort snapped back, frustration lacing his voice. "We must change our strategy. If the dread no longer works on them, we need to find another way to break their resistance." Zorik's jaw tightened, but he knew Vort was right. These humans had defied them in ways no other species had. The cache had already sent in more ground troops to overwhelm the human forces, but the humans fought back with an unyielding ferocity. "We will strike at their core," Vort continued, his tone growing colder. "Target their command structure. Without leadership, they will fall." Zorik nodded, a cold determination settling over him. "Prepare the Dreadcasters. This time, we take down their leaders directly." Back on the battlefield, Ethan's squad waited in intense silence as the cache formation drew closer. The massive figures of the enemy moved like shadows through the swirling smoke, creating an oppressive atmosphere that threatened to crush them under its weight. They had survived this long, but every man in the squad knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. "Get ready," Ethan urged, adrenaline surging through him. He could feel the tension building in the air, thickening with each passing moment. The cache troops, with their disciplined ranks and deadly weapons, represented everything they were fighting against. Yet, in this silence, there was a flicker of hope, a reminder that they had not yet been defeated. Ethan could feel his heartbeat in his ears as he focused on the advancing cache, knowing that their strategy had shifted. This was their chance to strike back. As the distance closed, he prepared to unleash the fury of those who had suffered, those who had fought against overwhelming odds. This was not just about survival, it was about reclaiming their agency and standing against tyranny. He could see Roar and the other men tense beside him, their resolve hardening. The time for fear was over. Now was the moment to transform that fear into action, to channel it into something fierce and unyielding. The cache may have thought they had the upper hand, but Ethan knew better. Humanity had endured, and now it was time to rise. "Remember what we're fighting for," Ethan said, glancing at his team. "This is our home, and we will not let them take it from us." With that, he steadied his aim and prepared for the confrontation ahead. The silence would be broken soon, and when it was, they would show the cache that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, not merely prey to be hunted. They would fight, and they would not back down. The battle for New Canaan had only just begun. Ethan whispered, his finger steady on the trigger. "On my mark." But before he could give the order, a deafening roar filled the air. Something massive descended from the sky, a sleek black ship cutting through the clouds like a blade. It landed behind the advancing cache lines, and even from this distance, Ethan could see a new wave of troops emerging from the ship. These weren't ordinary soldiers, they were Dreadcasters, the cache elite, capable of directing the dread with terrifying precision. "Grady!" Ethan called into the comms, his voice tense. "We've got company. Elite reinforcements, and they're bringing the dread back." Grady's voice crackled back, steady despite the unfolding chaos. "I see them. Hold your position. We're not giving up this ground." The cache advanced with renewed vigor, their dark figures looming menacingly. But this time, there was no immediate psychic assault. Ethan could feel the tension rising as the Dreadcasters positioned themselves behind their soldiers, clearly preparing for something worse than the initial onslaught. The cache were coming straight for their leadership. "They're targeting us," Ethan muttered, his heart racing. "They want to break us first." But Ethan wasn't the same man he had been when the invasion started. The fear that had once overwhelmed him was now something he controlled. He had learned that the key to resisting the dread wasn't about shutting it out, it was about facing it, owning it. In the back of the bunker, a small team of engineers and scientists worked feverishly on a device they hoped would change the tide. It was a rough prototype, hastily built from scraps of technology salvaged after the first cache assault. The device was designed to disrupt the psychic frequency the cache used to project the dread. "Is it ready?" Ethan asked, moving toward them as the cache soldiers drew nearer. The lead engineer, a grim man named Harris, looked up from his work, sweat beating on his forehead. "It's risky. We've only tested it in short bursts, and there's no guarantee it'll work on a large scale." Ethan glanced out at the battlefield, where the Dreadcasters were now clearly visible, their black robes flowing as they began to channel their psychic energy. "It has to work. We don't have another option." Harris nodded grimly and activated the device. A low hum filled the air as the machine powered up, sending out pulses of electromagnetic interference across the battlefield. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The cache continued their advance, and Ethan felt the familiar pressure of the dread beginning to creep back into his mind. But then, something changed. The air around them felt lighter, the oppressive weight of fear lessening. The cache dreadcasters hesitated, their psychic projection flickering. Confusion rippled through their ranks as they struggled to maintain control over the dread, but the device was breaking the connection between their minds and their targets. "It's working!" Harris exclaimed, a note of disbelief in his voice. Ethan didn't hesitate. "All right, men."
Oh.
His squad surged forward, rifles blazing as they charged into the weakened cache formation. The cache soldiers, now unable to rely on their psychic advantage, fought back with brute force. But the tide had turned. The humans were no longer fighting under the suffocating weight of fear. They fought with clear minds and lethal precision. Ethan moved through the battlefield with practiced efficiency, his rifle taking down cache soldiers with each shot. He could feel the shift in the air, the moment when the balance of power tilted in their favor. The cache were faltering, their once unshakable confidence cracking. In the distance, the dreadcasters began to retreat, unable to maintain their hold on the dread in the face of the human counterattack. Ethan gritted his teeth, watching them pull back. "We're not done yet," he muttered, determination surging through him. The cache had underestimated the humans, believing they could break them with fear. But in their quest to control, they had inadvertently ignited a fire within. The remnants of Ethan's squad fought with newfound strength, their adrenaline propelling them forward. The atmosphere around them crackled with energy. They were no longer mere defenders, they were warriors rising to reclaim their home. Each shot fired was a declaration of defiance, a message to the cache that they would not be broken. As they advanced, Ethan felt a strange sense of clarity wash over him. The fear that had once threatened to consume him now fueled his resolve. Each encounter with the cache served as a reminder of what was at stake, their homes, their families, their very humanity. He pressed forward, leading his squad deeper into the fray, knowing that every inch gained was a testament to their survival. Harris's device continued to emit its pulses, disrupting the dread and creating a barrier between the cache and their intended victims. The engineers and scientists in the bunker had done something remarkable. They had turned the tide against an ancient enemy that had believed itself invincible. Ethan could see it in the faces of his comrades, the dawning realization that they could fight back, that they could overcome. It was a feeling that resonated deep within him, a pulse that matched the rhythm of battle. They were more than survivors. They were the embodiment of resistance, an unstoppable force against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. "Push forward!" Ethan shouted, rallying his squad. "This is our moment. We take back what's ours." With each step, they moved closer to the heart of the cache forces. The dreadcasters were retreating, but the humans pressed on, unwilling to let the opportunity slip through their fingers. As Ethan raised his rifle, he caught a glimpse of the cache leadership, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. They hadn't expected this. They had thought the humans would succumb to fear and chaos, but instead, they were faced with an indomitable spirit that refused to yield. Ethan squeezed the trigger, feeling the satisfaction of justice as he took down another enemy soldier. In that moment, the battlefield transformed from a site of despair into one of hope. Each fallen cache soldier was a step toward reclaiming their world, a step toward freedom. Ethan knew they would fight until the last breath if it meant safeguarding their home, their families, and the future of humanity. As the echoes of gunfire mingled with the cries of battle, Ethan felt an unwavering determination surge through him. They had turned the tide, and now it was time to seize victory. Together, they would stand against the darkness, unbroken and fierce. The cache had awakened a sleeping giant, and now it was time for humanity to rise. The message was clear. The cache had relied on fear for too long, and now, for the first time, they were the ones who felt afraid. The cache line was breaking. Ethan Cross stood at the edge of a ridge, overlooking what had once been the heart of New Canaan's colony. Now, it was a torn wasteland of shattered buildings and burning wreckage, littered with the bodies of humans and cache alike. Yet the tide had shifted. For the first time since the invasion began, the humans had seized control of the fight. Ethan lowered his binoculars, scanning the retreating cache forces. The once imposing figures of their elite warriors, the dreadcasters, were barely visible now, mere shadows fading into the smoke of battle. They had underestimated the humans, and they were paying the price. "Sir, the cache are falling back," Raw reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "We've broken their lines." Ethan nodded but kept his eyes on the horizon. The air was tense, as if the very planet were holding its breath, waiting for the final blow. He knew the cache well enough by now to understand that a retreat didn't mean surrender, not yet. "They're regrouping," he said, his voice low and measured. "They'll be back. They always come back." Grady approached, wiping blood and dirt from his face, his expression fierce. "If they come back, they'll find we're not running." "Not anymore." Ethan looked at the grizzled soldier. Grady had been through hell, yet there was a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there when the invasion started. It was the same in all of them. The fear was still present, but they had learned to live with it and, more importantly, to use it. "They've never fought like this before," Ethan said, more to himself than to the others. "They've never faced an enemy that wouldn't break." Meanwhile, aboard the VOR, Commander Zoric's fist clenched around the edge of his command chair. The battle reports flashing across his screen confirmed what he had feared. The humans were not just resisting, they were winning. "This is unacceptable," Zoric growled, his voice seething with fury. "No species has ever resisted the dread this way." VOR stood at the other end of the room, his face a mask of frustration and disbelief. "The humans have found a way to counter our psychic projections. It's not just resistance anymore, they're disrupting the very essence of our power." Zoric slammed his fist onto the control panel, sparks flying as the circuit shorted. "I refuse to believe they can break us." But even as he said it, doubt clawed at him. Every tactic, every strategy the cache had relied on for centuries was failing. They had built their entire empire on the belief that fear was the ultimate weapon, a tool that had worked on every species they had encountered, from the fragile Lauren to the mighty GRE. But these humans were different. They didn't just survive the fear, they thrived in it. VOR's gaze darkened. This is no longer a battle of weapons or numbers. The humans have learned to turn fear into strength, and we... Zoric's eyes flared with rage. "We are the cache. Fear is our birthright, and it is no longer enough." VOR replied coldly, "Our confidence is our weakness. We have relied on the dread for too long." For the first time in his life, Zoric felt something unfamiliar slithering into his mind: doubt. The humans were not merely surviving, they were fighting back with an intensity and resolve that the cache had never anticipated. They were learning, adapting, and becoming stronger with every battle. "Prepare the fleet for full withdrawal," Zoric ordered, his voice low but edged with bitterness. "We can't afford more losses. We'll regroup and strike again later." VOR's expression was unreadable, but he did not argue. He turned to relay the orders, though in his mind, he wondered if the cache could ever recover from this blow. Their aura of invincibility had been shattered. Back on the battlefield, Ethan took a moment to gather his thoughts as the adrenaline began to fade. He could see the retreating cache forces, their once menacing formations breaking apart under the pressure of the human counterattack. The destruction that surrounded him was a stark reminder of what was at stake. Each fallen comrade, each broken building, was a testament to their struggle, but it was also a symbol of their resilience. As the dust settled, the humans began to emerge from the shadows of the wreckage, standing tall in defiance. The fear that had once gripped their hearts had transformed into a raw, unwavering determination. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their identity, their homes, and their future. Ethan's thoughts turned to the leadership of the cache, who were likely scrambling to regroup and rethink their strategies. He knew they wouldn't stay down for long. The cache had a long history of brutal efficiency, and their refusal to accept defeat was part of what made them so dangerous. But this time felt different. This time, the humans were ready. He turned to Grady and Raw, who stood by his side, their expressions a mix of relief and anticipation. "We've got to capitalize on this momentum," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We can't let them regroup. We push forward, we keep them on their heels." Raw nodded, enthusiasm flickering in his eyes. "Let's do it." Grady placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You lead, we follow. Let's show them what we're made of." With renewed purpose, Ethan set his sights on the horizon where the cache were retreating. "Let's move," he shouted, rallying the troops. They surged forward, driven not only by the desire to reclaim their land but by the realization that they had the power to change the course of this war. As they pressed onward, Ethan couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. The battle for New Canaan wasn't just a fight for territory, it was a fight for their very souls. They were more than mere survivors, they were warriors, forged in the fires of adversity. And they would fight for every inch of ground they regained. As the humans advanced, the fear that had once gripped them like a vice was now a weapon in their hands. They would not back down. They would not cower in the face of terror. Instead, they would rise, stronger and more resolute than ever, proving to the cache that humanity was not to be underestimated. With every step they took, they were reclaiming their home. And in that moment, as the remnants of the cash forces disappeared into the haze, Ethan knew that they were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their destiny. Worse still, the cash had lost something far more valuable than a single battle. They had lost their confidence. Back on the ground, Ethan and his team had pushed deeper into what had once been cash-controlled territory. The colony lay in ruins, but the humans held it now. They had fought tooth and nail, driven not just by survival but by a fierce determination that had grown stronger with each passing hour. Ethan watched as Grady led a group of men through the debris, checking for any remaining cash soldiers. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The cash were retreating, but Ethan knew they wouldn't stop. They couldn't. "They'll come back," Raw said, standing beside Ethan, his voice tinged with worry. "Won't they?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, they'll come back. But next time, it'll be different." Raw frowned, clearly unsure. "How so?" Ethan met his gaze, his expression hardening. "Because now they're afraid." The words hung in the air, sinking in. The cash, once the most feared predators in the galaxy, were experiencing something they had never known: fear. Not the kind they projected onto others, but the real kind, the kind that gnawed at you, made you second-guess every decision. It was the kind that humans had lived with all their lives. "We're not the prey anymore," Ethan continued, his voice steady. "They've spent centuries thinking fear was their weapon. Now they're going to learn what it's like to be hunted." Raw let out a breath, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "Do you think we can ever stop them for good?" Ethan was silent for a moment, reflecting on all they had lost, the lives, the homes, the innocence. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow," he finally said, "but we will." Grady's voice crackled through the comms. "Cross, we've secured the western perimeter. No sign of stragglers." Ethan tapped his earpiece, relief flooding through him. "Good work. Keep an eye out. They might try one last push before pulling out." He turned back to Raw. "We keep pushing forward. We take this one step at a time." Inside the VOR, Zorik stared at the stars beyond the ship's viewport, his mind racing. The retreat was underway, and the cash fleet was pulling away from New Canaan, limping back to the safety of their home systems. The human resistance had been far stronger than they anticipated, but Zorik was not ready to give up. He couldn't. "We'll return," he muttered to himself, bitterness and resolve mingling in his voice. "And next time, we will crush them." Yet even as he said it, doubt lingered. The humans had done more than just survive. They had adapted, turning the cash's greatest weapon against them. For the first time in his life, Zorik felt the cold grip of fear tightening around his own heart. Voa entered the chamber, his expression grave. "The fleet is secure. We'll regroup in Karish Prime." Zorik didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the stars as if searching for something beyond them, something he wasn't sure he'd find. "The humans," Zorik whispered, almost to himself. "They were never supposed to win." Voa's voice was low, carrying a weight of realization. "But they didn't just win, Commander. They showed us something we've never faced before." Zorik's eyes flickered with a mixture of rage and resignation. "What's that?" Voa's answer was simple, yet profound. "Hope." On the surface of New Canaan, Ethan Cross stood tall as the smoke of battle began to clear. The cash fleet was retreating, their once unstoppable force driven back. The humans had won the day, but deep down, Ethan knew this was just the beginning. "They'll be back," Grady said, standing beside him, his voice firm and resolute. Ethan nodded, his determination unwavering. "And when they do, we'll be ready." But for now, there was something else in the air, something new. A sense of victory, a sense of belief. The cash had lost more than just a battle, they had lost their confidence. Back on the ground, Ethan and his team had pushed deeper into what had once been cash-controlled territory. The colony lay in ruins, but the humans held it now. They had fought tooth and nail, driven not just by survival but by a fierce determination that had grown stronger with each passing hour. Ethan watched as Grady led a group of men through the debris, checking for any remaining cash soldiers. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The cash were retreating, but Ethan knew they wouldn't stop. They couldn't. "They'll come back," Raw said, standing beside Ethan, his voice tinged with worry. "Won't they?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, they'll come back. But next time, it'll be different." Raw frowned, clearly unsure. "How so?" Ethan met his gaze, his expression hardening. "Because now they're afraid." The words hung in the air, sinking in. The cash, once the most feared predators in the galaxy, were experiencing something they had never known: fear. Not the kind they projected onto others, but the real kind, the kind that gnawed at you, made you second-guess every decision. It was the kind that humans had lived with all their lives. "We're not the prey anymore," Ethan continued, his voice steady. "They've spent centuries thinking fear was their weapon. Now they're going to learn what it's like to be hunted." Roar let out a breath, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "Do you think we can ever stop them for good?" Ethan was silent for a moment, reflecting on all they had lost, the lives, the homes, the innocence. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow," he finally said, "but we will." Grady's voice crackled through the comms. "Cross, we've secured the western perimeter. No sign of stragglers." Ethan tapped his earpiece, relief flooding through him. "Good work. Keep an eye out. They might try one last push before pulling out." He turned back to Roar. "We keep pushing forward. We take this one step at a time." Inside the VOR, Zorik stared at the stars beyond the ship's viewport, his mind racing. The retreat was underway, and the cash fleet was pulling away from New Canaan, limping back to the safety of their home systems. The human resistance had been far stronger than they anticipated, but Zorik was not ready to give up. He couldn't. "We'll return," he muttered to himself, bitterness and resolve mingling in his voice. "And next time, we will crush them." Yet even as he said it, doubt lingered. The humans had done more than just survive. They had adapted, turning the cash's greatest weapon against them. For the first time in his life, Zorik felt the cold grip of fear tightening around his own heart. VOR entered the chamber, his expression grave. "The fleet is secure. We'll regroup in Karish Prime." Zorik didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the stars as if searching for something beyond them, something he wasn't sure he'd find. "The humans," Zorik whispered, almost to himself. "They were never supposed to win." VOR's voice was low, carrying a weight of realization. "But they didn't just win, Commander. They showed us something we've never faced before." Zorik's eyes flickered with a mixture of rage and resignation. "What's that?" VOR's answer was simple, yet profound. "Hope." On the surface of New Canaan, Ethan Cross stood tall as the smoke of battle began to clear. The cash fleet was retreating, their once unstoppable force driven back. The humans had won the day, but deep down, Ethan knew this was just the beginning. "They'll be back," Grady said, standing beside him, his voice firm and resolute. Ethan nodded, his determination unwavering. "And when they do, we'll be ready." But for now, there was something else in the air, something new. A sense of victory, a sense of belief. The cash had lost more than just a battle, they had lost their confidence. As the remnants of the cash forces melted into the distance, Ethan felt a surge of hope coursing through him and his men. They had fought against insurmountable odds, defying everything the cash had thrown at them, and they had emerged victorious. This victory, however, was not just a matter of strategy or firepower. It was a testament to their resilience, their capacity to adapt and evolve in the face of overwhelming fear. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of their struggle, a stark reminder of the price they had paid. Yet, amidst the wreckage, a new spirit was emerging, a spirit that embraced the chaos of conflict and transformed it into resolve. Ethan glanced at the faces of his comrades, seeing in them a reflection of his own determination. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their future, for their right to exist without the shadow of dread looming over them. The weight of their past losses would always be a part of them, but it was no longer the defining force in their lives. They had learned to face their fears, to harness them into a powerful weapon against their oppressors. The very essence of what it meant to be human had shifted. They were now the hunters, not the hunted. Ethan turned back toward the remnants of the colony, a flicker of determination igniting within him. The fight for New Canaan had been hard won, but it was just the beginning of a larger struggle. With the cash retreating, they had bought themselves a moment of respite, but Ethan understood that they had to prepare for the inevitable return of their foes. "Let's get to work," he said, his voice rising above the quiet after the storm. "We have a lot to do." As his team set to work, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. They would not only defend what they had reclaimed, they would fortify it. They would turn their fear into strength and their resolve into action. This time, They would not just survive, they would thrive. They would learn from their experiences and build a future free from the tyranny of the cash. And in doing so, they would show the universe that humanity was not just a fleeting presence, they were a force to be reckoned with, a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. With the first rays of dawn breaking through the haze of battle, Ethan knew one thing for certain: they would be ready. The cash had lost their confidence, and with it, their grip on power. They would return, yes, but this time, the humans would be waiting, armed with the knowledge that they were no longer the prey. They were the hunters, and they would fight to the last breath for their freedom and their future.